Hey everyone, and welcome to your week 5 overview video for Education 438, Teaching Reading and Writing in the Content Area. I'm also going to use this video to give you an overview of your mini lesson outline, which is your major assignment for this week. So without further ado, grab your caffeine, I've got mine, and let's jump in. This video, like all of our others, will include a recap of everything that we discussed and talked about last week, as well as some of my big takeaways. We'll look at our week 5 topics, learning objectives, and essential questions. We will take a look at what you are going to be reading and watching for this week. And then, of course, I will do an in-depth breakdown of your mini lesson outline overview. And then, of course, I'll end with some reminders. The biggest one is that we don't have a required Zoom meeting this week. So last week was an interesting week in the sense that we really kind of looked at some activities that you can take and use in the classroom right away. So we talked a lot about scaffolding, modeling, and building habits of connection and communication, and how these are essential factors in students' abilities to increase their academic vocabulary, skill, and thinking development. We also spent some time looking at differences and similarities between prior knowledge and background knowledge and where they cross over. And then I gave you an article that looked at 10 specific strategies for building background knowledge in the classroom. Part of what you did with your pod post is that you thought about which one of those would be most beneficial to you. And then for those of you who were at our required Zoom last Wednesday, we talked about the basics of crafting a mini lesson, and I walked you through kind of how I approach mini lesson outlining. And I'm going to go over that a little bit more in this video today. So, my big takeaways, as always, I like to give you at least 2 or 3. My big takeaways from last week were focused a lot on actual teaching, just because I've spent so much time in the high school classroom, the college classroom, that I'm continuously teaching about, or thinking about, sorry, how much modeling is too much modeling, how much scaffolding is too much scaffolding or not enough, etc. So, Zvere's focus on gradual release of responsibility was a big takeaway for me. Scaffolding should provide these really high levels of support in the earlier novice stages of learning, but gradually it's up to us as the teacher to take that support away so that our students can become independent thinkers, and independently become masters of that subject matter, whatever we're teaching, right? So it's always that balance of finding the proper amount of support, not too much and not too little. And this relates to my second big takeaway, which is that we as teachers need to avoid linguistic enabling. So almost giving so much support that we enable our students to not become better performers at a particular task. And I was really taken, especially with this quote from Zvere's, which is, "We must be careful not to rob our diverse students of the opportunities to think more deeply and respond academically, even when we think they struggle or when we think we don't have the time." So when I was a fresh teacher, one of the mistakes that I often made was if I saw a student struggling, I would kind of jump in, right, and try to help them out because I didn't want them to feel I didn't want them to lose confidence or feel like they couldn't do something. But what I realized later on was that I was enabling them in a lot of ways by not allowing them to kind of work through something on their own, even if it took extra time. So that quote was really meaningful for me. And then, of course, I'm always left thinking about content knowledge versus pedagogical content knowledge. So, what does it mean to be a master of your content versus a master teacher of your content? They're very different things. And Zveres takes it a step further by asking us to consider pedagogical language knowledge as well, pointing out that it's essential for us as teachers to realize and address our own language blind spots within whatever we're teaching. So those were my kind of big takeaways for the week. I also was really excited and moved by our conversation on Zoom last Wednesday, when it came to thinking about how to get to know our students and how they learn a little bit better. So I didn't list that here, but that was a big takeaway for me as well. So jumping into this week, I'm really excited about week 5 because week 5 covers, I think, what I have found to be some of the most meaningful moments of being a teacher. And those are moments that have to do with discussion, whole class discussion, small group discussion, pair share discussion, and what discussion can do for your students and for you as a teacher. So, our topics for week 5, we're going to talk about whole class discussions for content and language development. And Zveers is going to give us a host of strategies and activities we can use when it comes to whole class discussion in our classrooms. Increasing learner confidence by speaking and listening in small groups and pairs. Often, whole group discussion doesn't always work for every student because they may not feel comfortable sharing out or they just might not be confident yet. So, we're going to learn a lot of strategies this week for small group and pair discussion. A lot of these are ones that I've either tried out or after rereading about them in Zveers want to try out. Strategies for authentic, meaningful inquiry in the classroom. So this week I'm giving you some resource materials on two, I don't want to say frameworks, but two kind of ways to approach helping students create better questions. One of these is called the question formulation technique, and then the other is Costa's levels of questioning. And then, of course, crafting mini lessons for academic vocabulary and thinking skill development. So we're going to take what we started last week in regards to mini lessons and develop that even further this week. Our learning objectives. You will explore how to facilitate meaningful classroom talk through engaging with the strategies and activities for whole class discussion that are covered by Zveers in Chapter 5. You will familiarize yourselves with ways to increase academic listening. Zveers has a whole section on academic listening, which I love. Small group discussions and pair work in the secondary classroom through reading and annotating Chapter 6. You will deepen your understanding of how inquiry can be used to develop academic language and thinking skills through exploring two resources for creating higher order questions. And these are the two I mentioned, the QFT and Costa's levels of questions. And then we'll engage in low stakes lesson planning for academic language and thinking skill development, creating mini lesson outlines as preparation for mini teach, which we'll do at our next required Zoom meeting. So if you were on Wednesday's Zoom, you know that I talked about mini lessons as almost a mini backwards design way of thinking about lesson planning. So I want this first attempt at lesson planning in here to feel very low stakes and very accessible. And I'll walk you through the lesson plan outline a little bit later in this video. All right, so I took a bunch of notes while I was rereading the two chapters that you are assigned for Zveers this week, and I came up with some essential questions for you to think about as you're reading and as you're annotating this week. The first one is huge, okay? We have moved away from what Paulo Freire would call the sage on the stage or banking model of education. So our classrooms these days should be less about teacher talk and more about student talk. So one of my big questions for you is, how can we create more student-centered and student-driven classrooms through creating meaningful opportunities for classroom talk amongst students and less talk for us as teachers? Now, you'll read this section in Zveers, but it's not that Zveers says that lecturing isn't important. It does have its benefits. But for really meaningful and authentic teaching, we want our classrooms to be driven by student talk and discussion and conversation. In what ways can we become better teachers of listening skills? This section always really gets me thinking because I think that when I'm thinking about my own teaching practice and what I'd like to get better at, teaching listening is something that I think I could do more explicitly. And so I want you to think about this too, right? How can we help our students to position academic listening as just as valuable as text comprehension? How can we actively seek to avoid the trivial pursuit model of education? As I mentioned earlier, we're trying to get away from that sage on the stage, or what Freire calls the banking model of education, where we approach our students as mere receptacles just to receive the information we're giving them. We also don't want knowledge in our classroom to just feel like a bunch of facts just to list off or memorize for a test, right? So how do we avoid that? And in particular, how do we avoid that through creating meaningful small-scale discussions, pair work, whole class discussions that once again center that student talk? What does it mean to engage in meaningful inquiry? So Zveers is going to remind us that we don't want we don't want to over question our students, but we do want our students to learn how to develop good questions for themselves, right? So, what does it mean to engage in meaningful inquiry? How can we assist our students in developing strategies for asking meaningful, authentic questions that have depth, not something that we can answer easily and just move on, not a question that will just allow us to list off another fact that we know, but questions that have depth, right? How do we help our students craft good questions? That's a question I've been asking myself for years, and I think it will continue to be a pedagogical focus for me, right? Inquiry and listening. We've got a cat friend back there. I don't know if you can hear meowing, but he's very active. Anyways, tangent, let's get back to it. So, those are kind of the essential questions that I want you to think about this week. And I want you to keep in mind, maybe I'll go save him. I don't know if you all can hear him meowing. It never ends with animals. As you guys are approaching these essential questions, I don't necessarily want you to answer them. But think about them as you're annotating, right? Because later in the semester, I'm going to have you actually do an inquiry project where you're going to create a question for yourself that you want to explore in depth, right? So I think all these essential questions that I give you every week are hopefully going to lead to you coming up with your own question that you really want to explore in relationship to literacy instruction. Okay, so no required Zoom meeting this week. And we've got two major things coming up this week that I'm going to talk a little bit more about by switching over to our overview for this week. So if you scroll down, you'll see that our readings for this week are to read Building Academic Language, Chapter 5 and Chapter 6. This is the last kind of major work we're going to be doing with this textbook, which I hope you found really meaningful. I know I have. And then there is also a reading that I want you to do on the question formulation technique that I mentioned and Costa's level of questions. And I'll kind of walk you through that in a sec. We have two assignments this week. The first is to respond to your pod group members, their second post, right? So this is due Sunday by 11:59 p.m. And then your mini lesson outline is due Sunday by 11:59 p.m. as well. Overview video, this one is going to have directions for you, but I also have an example for you. If you want to get started on readings for week 6, I did list them here. They are PDFs. You'll notice that we don't have textbook readings for next week. So just real quick, this is the reading that I mentioned about question formulation technique and Costa's levels of inquiry. It's not super long, but there is a video where you can kind of see how this question formulation technique would work in action. And then there's a PDF about Costa's levels of inquiry. But what I want to spend some time on now is your mini lesson outline. So you know that at our next Zoom, you're going to be required to teach, and I put this in quotes, right, because it's a mock teach, some of your peers a mini lesson that relates to an academic vocabulary or thinking skill you want to develop in students in your particular content area. So we're going to come on the next Zoom meeting just ready to go, ready to teach mini lessons in small groups. So to prepare for that, I want you to create a mini lesson outline that, as I mentioned, is like a mini sort of backwards design. So a mini lesson, to recap from our last Zoom, is a short lesson, about 7 to 15 minutes, that focuses on a specific skill or concept. This skill or concept generally connects to the larger goals of a course and more narrowly of a unit. And for our purposes, the skill or concept should relate to developing academic language or literacy skills within your teaching discipline. So here's the overview of the assignment. You're going to engage in a low-stakes attempt at backwards design, choosing a skill to teach, develop in a 17 to 15-minute mini lesson, as well as a CCSS literacy standard that relates or aligns with your chosen skill. Before you mock teach this lesson to your peers at our next required Zoom, you will submit a mini lesson plan outline here that includes the following info: content area and grade level in which you envision teaching your mini lesson, academic vocabulary or content literacy skill the mini lesson seeks to develop, a learning objective, an aligned Common Core literacy standard. Please include the full standard. You can see my example. And if you need to link to the Common Core state standards, it's in our resources module. How you see this mini lesson fitting within a larger unit. A potential post-lesson assessment to check for understanding that should be low stakes. Activities to be used within the mini lesson, the duration of the mini lesson, and then a chronological procedure, kind of like a step-by-step process that takes me through the lesson. So your total points possible for this are 15, and it is due September 21st by 11:59 p.m. On the syllabus, you'll notice that this assignment is worth 20 points. The other 5 points come just from showing up to that Zoom on the 24th and attempting to teach your mini lesson to your peers. So you're going to get 5 points just for showing up to that Zoom and attempting to teach your peers your mini lesson. I've got a cat friend here, you all. Another one. We can't escape. You can probably see him in the corner. So one of the things that I've included this week is an example mini lesson for you. So I'll kind of let you look at that on your own, but it has all the requirements that I just mentioned for your mini lesson outline. And you can definitely check it out and let me know if you have any questions. So that is that for this week. Oh, here's Pippin. You can say hi. There he is. Maybe should I give you extra credit if you watch this video and email me the name of the cat that I just mentioned. I hope you all are doing great. And if you need some help while you're working on your mini lessons this week, please reach out. I would be happy to look at the content strategy or kind of skill that you choose. I would be happy to see if it aligns with Common Core. Whatever you need me to do, just let me know if you need some help. And I think that's it. I will see you all not this Wednesday, but next.